Welcome to our deep dive into the dark side of Stockholm Syndrome. You know, this ain't just some Hollywood plot point. This is a real, raw, and often misunderstood psychological phenomenon that can have devastating and long-lasting effects on victims. Today we'll explore the unsettling complexities behind this phenomenon, separating fact from fiction and shedding light on the harrowing experiences of those who've lived through it. We're going to break this down, make it plain, and get to the heart of this complex issue. Now, let's talk about how this whole thing gets twisted in the victim's mind. It's a complex and dark process that leaves lasting scars. See, the captor, they're not stupid. They use this whole playbook of psychological manipulation. A system meticulously designed to break down the victim's sense of self, to make them question their own reality. It starts with fear, raw and consuming, making the victim feel completely powerless. This fear is the foundation upon which all other manipulations are built. Then comes the control, the constant threat of harm, the deprivation, all chipping away at the victim's resolve. Every action is calculated to instill a sense of helplessness. They start to crave any shred of kindness, any sign that maybe, just maybe, things aren't so bad. This craving becomes a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in a dark world. And that's when the manipulation sinks its teeth in, deep and unrelenting. The captor might offer small acts of kindness, a little bit of comfort, all strategically timed to make the victim feel indebted, even grateful. These moments of kindness are not genuine, they are tools of control. It's a twisted game, but it works. The victim's mind becomes a battlefield, constantly torn between fear and a desperate need for approval. The victim starts to see the world through the captor's eyes, their reality warped by fear and isolation. They lose touch with their own identity. They start to believe that their survival depends on appeasing their captor, on clinging to this distorted bond. This belief becomes their new reality. Their sense of self-worth gets eroded, replaced by a desperate need for the captor's approval. They no longer see themselves as individuals, but as extensions of their captor's will. It's a slow, insidious process, this psychological manipulation, and it leaves the victim feeling trapped, both physically and emotionally. The chains are invisible, but no less real. They're caught in this web of fear and dependence, and breaking free seems impossible. The psychological scars run deep, making the path to freedom a long and arduous journey. Now, here's where it gets really heartbreaking. You see, even if the victim escapes, even if they're physically free, the trauma of Stockholm Syndrome, it doesn't just disappear, it clings to them like a shadow that never leaves. It lingers, festering like an open wound, refusing to heal. The emotional scars run deep, and they can take years, even a lifetime, to heal. It's a long, arduous journey. Many survivors, they struggle with this overwhelming sense of guilt and shame. They feel a weight that is almost unbearable. They question why they felt this connection, this bizarre sense of loyalty to the person who held them captive. It's a question that haunts them. They wonder if they're somehow to blame, if they could have fought back harder, if they're somehow broken. These thoughts plague their minds, and the confusion, it's just crippling. It paralyzes them, making it hard to move forward. They're trying to reconcile the horror they endured with this strange sense of attachment, this feeling of dependence on their captor. It's a mental battle that rages on. It's like their emotions are in a tug-of-war and they're caught in the middle, unable to find peace. The world tells them they should be relieved, they should be celebrating their freedom, but inside they're battling these conflicting emotions, this storm of trauma that just won't let up. It's a silent struggle. They need understanding, they need compassion, but too often they face judgment and disbelief. They need a safe space to heal. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the reason why so many survivors suffer in silence: social misunderstanding. It's a pervasive issue that affects countless lives. We live in a world where people judge first and ask questions later. Snap judgments and harsh criticisms are all too common, and when it comes to Stockholm Syndrome, that judgment can be brutal. The lack of empathy and understanding is staggering. People who've never experienced this kind of trauma, they look at the situation and say, "Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you escape?" They fail to grasp the complexity of the situation. They just don't get it. They don't see the invisible chains that bind the victim. They don't understand the psychological manipulation, the fear, the complete and utter breakdown of the victim's sense of self. It's a deep, insidious process, and that lack of understanding, it leads to blame. It creates a toxic environment where the victim is further victimized. Victims get labeled as weak, as crazy, as somehow complicit in their own captivity. These labels are not just hurtful, they are damaging. They get hit with this double whammy of trauma. First the ordeal itself, then the judgment and disbelief from the very people they should be able to turn to for support. It's a cruel irony. This misunderstanding, it's like pouring salt in the wound. It exacerbates the pain and suffering. It makes the healing process so much harder because now, on top of everything else, the victim has to deal with the shame and the stigma. The road to recovery becomes even more daunting. They start to internalize the blame, questioning their own sanity, their own worth. The cycle of self-doubt and self-blame is perpetuated, making it incredibly difficult to move forward. Chapter 4. Now, let's get one thing straight. Stockholm Syndrome is not about love, it's not about some romantic connection between captor and captive. It's about power. Raw, brutal, imbalanced power. The captor holds all the cards, controlling every aspect of the victim's life, their food, their water, their movement, even their bathroom breaks. They create this environment of absolute control where the victim's every move is dictated by their captor's whims. And within this pressure cooker of fear and isolation, the victim's survival instincts kick in. They start to see the captor not as the enemy, but as the source of their needs, the one who holds the key to their survival. This isn't a genuine connection, folks. It's a survival mechanism, a way for the victim's psyche to cope with an unbearable situation. They cling to the captor because, in their traumatized state, that's the only way they can make sense of their world. Chapter 5. You know, one of the most dangerous things we've done to victims of Stockholm Syndrome is romanticize it. We see it in movies, we read it in books, this idea that there's something alluring, something even beautiful about a captive falling for their captor. But let me tell you something, there's nothing romantic about abuse, about manipulation, about the systematic stripping away of a person's identity. This romanticization, it trivializes the very real and very painful experiences of survivors. It turns a horrific ordeal into a plot device, a source of entertainment. And what's worse, it perpetuates this dangerous misconception that there's something inherently appealing about being controlled, about being someone's possession. This isn't a love story, folks. It's a story of survival, of trauma, of the long and arduous journey back to wholeness. And it's time we start treating it as such. Chapter 6. Here's the harsh reality. Sometimes rescuing a victim of Stockholm Syndrome is incredibly difficult. And it's not because the authorities aren't trying, it's because the victims themselves often resist rescue. They've been so psychologically manipulated, so conditioned to see the world through the captor's eyes, that they defend their captor, they refuse to cooperate with authorities, they even see their rescuers as the enemy. Imagine that. The people trying to help you, the people trying to free you from this nightmare, they're seen as the threat. That's the power of Stockholm Syndrome. It distorts reality to the point where up is down, black is white, and the only safe haven is with the very person who's holding you captive. This resistance to rescue, it breaks the hearts of families, it frustrates law enforcement, and most importantly, it puts the victim at further risk. It can mean prolonged captivity, continued abuse, and even the possibility of the situation escalating to a point of no return. Outro! Thank you for joining us in exploring the dark side of Stockholm Syndrome. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the psychological manipulation tactics used by captors to the long-term trauma faced by survivors. Remember, this isn't just a Hollywood plot device, it's a real and devastating condition that affects countless lives. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into psychological phenomena. Let's continue to raise awareness and understanding about these complex issues. Stay safe and take care.